recorded actually for me by a previous student named Malia Livingston, current MCBS student. She made that for me as a portfolio assignment early on in her Portfolio 1 class. Been using it for about a year now, and I always like to give her a shout out when I can. It is week 2. I am Emily Ray. This is Editing for the Web. We are making a transition from the discovery planning phase of our website development project with Real Deal Tacos into more of the content development and execution phase of this project. So you guys had your proposal presentations due the other night, and as they're coming in, I've taken a look at them and wanted to provide just a few notes and some feedback about a few of the things that I have seen. Now keep in mind that a proposal is your articulation as to the scope of the work and how you intend to meet the needs of Real Deal Tacos and the target audience that they serve through building a website, right? So as I'm reviewing some of the proposal presentations, I was seeing a few things. So first enough, not enough explanation of why. Now, when you guys are giving specific recommendations for, I want to use this content management system, or I think we should use this kind of photography or this kind of social media, make sure that you're always explaining that choice, putting in the why or the because. That is what your client is paying you for, is the insight into these recommendations, right? This is where you are bringing value to the project and also showing your credibility and professionalism, right? And when your client understands the reasons behind your recommendations, it just breeds more confidence in you and in the strategy that you are putting together. Now, another thing that I see is not enough or not clear enough definition of the scope of the project, right? The scope is basically the entire outline of the work that's to be done. Now, this needs to be really clear because you don't want any misunderstanding between the client and yourself when all is said and done, right? So if your proposal says that there are going to be 5 pages, at the end of the website building project, there should be 5 pages. Even if your client comes back and says, oh, I thought that we were going to add a video page. You can always say, you know what, that is a great idea, and I definitely recommend that as a phase 2. But just taking a look at the proposal that we put together and the definition of the scope, this is kind of beyond what we agreed on, and it's kind of beyond the time and money estimate that I provided. And you just want to be really clear on that because you'll use it, the scope or the proposal, as somewhat of a checklist of like, this is what I promised my client and this is what I have to deliver. Now, the last thing that I see pretty often with these things is a disconnect between the proposal, the sitemap, and the wireframe. So these are 3 elements that work together to give a more complete or thorough explanation and picture of the site that you intend to build for your client and why. The proposal, which is kind of like the verbal articulation where you are explaining your choices, that's great for the people who need that reasoning why. The sitemap is an outline of the pages and details the content that you're going to find there. Now that's great for the person who needs to know how all of this stuff is going to be organized. And the wireframe is a visual diagram that basically depicts where content is going to go. It doesn't show content itself, it just shows boxes with X's or links or header or footer areas. So it's only meant to be a visual tool to give your idea, or to give your client more of an idea of your intent with the layout and design. Now each one of these things needs to support the other one. For example, in the proposal, if you say, I recommend we create a 5-page website that has A, B, C, D, and E links. Great. Then your sitemap should say, these are the pages, A, B, C, D, and E, and these are the content that is going to be found on each of those pages. And then your wireframe should also depict 5 pages within the navigation, right? A, B, C, D, and E. And in that way, you can see how each one of them supports and aligns with the other and gives a fuller, more complete picture of what it is that you're trying to build for your client. So one of the last things that I need to address is that the examples that are provided to you guys for creating these things are meant to guide the choices and to guide your creations, but not to be copied verbatim. And the reason why I say this is not just because that's somewhat cheating and cutting corners, but because you guys need to understand that every website development scenario and every media project in general is going to have its own nuances, and that it's individual, and every target audience is going to need something different. Every business is going to need something different. So if you're just copying and pasting something verbatim, you're not taking the time, care, and attention that's needed to give your client something that has been individualized for their needs and for their target audience. So again, you guys use examples as a guide, but not as something to be copied. Okay, moving into our discussion today, I kind of alluded at the beginning of this talk that we're going to be considering some content development strategies this week. You've made your plan for Real Deal Taco. You've created your presentation and your proposal. And you guys can assume at this point that your client is on board. Real Deal Taco has picked you to create their new website, right? And so at this juncture, you're going to start to take a look at that folder full of content and make decisions about how and where to lay all of that stuff out. Now, what we're going to talk about today is just a little bit of insight into those choices and some ideas about how to incorporate some concepts and some techniques when laying out that stuff for Real Deal Tacos. So, as I like to do, let's start off with a vague question that's seemingly unrelated, but I'm hoping to be able to tie back into the discussion. And that is, what did you do online today, Jason?
Online today?
Yeah.
Research wrestling moves.
Okay, he researched some wrestling moves. For those of you who don't know Jason, he's an up-and-coming wrestling star. Kayla? Mostly homework, okay.
Reading for graphic design.
Okay.
And, practicing with logos.
Okay, so homework, interacting with our learning management system, also known as FSO. Let me see what I did. The first thing that I did was I had a virtual meeting with another professor at another university. We're collaborating on a research study, so that's kind of cool. It's about the RISE model. What? I also, of course, checked emails, and I did a little bit of research myself for a few freelance projects, and of course, I listened to a podcast with my last class. We did a really cool graphic design workshop. I'll tell you guys all about it another time, and maybe you can sit in on the next one. And I was also in the learning management system, FSO, to respond to students who have contacted me there. So quite a variety of things here in the room. The reason why I ask that of you guys is because I'm not just being nosy, but I'm trying to highlight the fact that we do a lot of different things, a lot of different categories of things online every day, whether it's, reading news, streaming music or podcasts or Netflix, shopping, booking vacations, getting directions, researching a topic. Like, this is just such a very short list of things that we could expand pretty much endlessly is what I meant to say. But each one of these things can be broadly categorized into three kind of main funnels, right? Or three main reasons of why people use the web, right? People use the web to satisfy goals, complete tasks, or answer questions, right? So Jason was researching wrestling moves. He was getting his questions answered about different things, right? And in a way, he was also satisfying a goal of his, which is to become more knowledgeable in that area, right? Kayla, you were doing homework. You were completing tasks, right? Exactly. I was streaming a podcast, right? So that kind of had dual purpose for me because one of the goals was just to learn the topic that was in, in that content. The other one was I was running a workshop with another class and I was completing that task, right? So, there will always be exceptions to the rule, but, broadly speaking, people use the web to do these three things, right? So, because we know that this is why people use the web, right? To, what were the three? Complete tasks, ask questions, satisfy goals, all right? We know that this is why they're going to the web. As designers, as web strategists, we must develop content that supports them in their mission for being there, right? We need to develop that content, but we also need to lay that content out in a way that supports them in that mission. Let's think about our friends, Real Deal Tacos, really quick. We have hinted at in other conversations, like what are the most important things to Real Deal Taco customers when they come to that site? What are they looking for? What is their mission for being there? You think? They want tacos. Okay. So they want to know menu, right? And then what's the other really important thing? Location, because this truck is moving around and I need to know it is Wednesday at probably like, I don't know, what is it, 4 o'clock now? And I am hungry and I need to know where this truck is located. So that is why I might be going to the Real Deal Taco site. So menu and location. All right. We know that this is what their mission is. How can we build and lay out the content to support them in that mission? The first thing is make sure that we have not put up any blocks to them finding this online, right? Having clear navigational options that could very intuitively lead them down that path, right? For example, I think that the word menu would be a good link title for menu items, right? I've made an intuitive choice of how I am labeling that, right? If I were to call that services and then put menu content underneath it, I've created a block for my users because they more intuitively are thinking about that not as a service that we provide, but as a menu, right? For example, with the locations, is something to think about. You might think that you should put that on a contact page. And I'd say, that, could be a good place for it. A lot of people put directions and location information under contact, but this is a very specific thing that we're looking for that changes all the time, right? And because Real Deal Tacos doesn't have a brick and mortar location, meaning that there's no restaurant or office, that this truck is just on the go, right? It would be kind of misleading to put a location on the contact page because that's not there's no consistent place that you can find them there, right? It might be, it's not wrong, but is there a better way to do it is what I'm asking you guys to think about, right? So we must develop and lay content out in a way that supports users' mission for being on the site. Does that make sense? We're thinking about what they need and we're making design decisions based on that. But this requires us to know our audience, right? And we've done a little bit of work, learning about who the target audience of the Real Deal Taco food truck are, right? And so your design decisions for this fictitious website should be based on the needs of this audience, what they're coming to the site for, and the needs of the business to promote their brand and get their name out there, right? So in thinking about this audience and any audience, we're kind of going from some examples, the specific back out into the general here. I want to ask you guys, with any audience online, how do people read online? Left to right. Okay, I'm just going to repeat this out loud and because I'm recording this for the online. What you just said is sometimes people just read the titles, right? What is that doing? So,
Something that's eye-catching that draws the people.
okay, so they're only looking at the eye-catching things. Okay. You guys you're like basically knocking on the door of the answer that I'm trying to get to here. And that is that people don't really read online. They mostly just scan information, right? And that's what you're saying. They look at titles, they look at headings, they look at like what's moving on the page, they look at what they find most attractive or most engaging. But that stuff is informed by what? By their mission for being there, right? Their mission for being there. They are scanning the information. Their eyes are darting all over the place because, most people are going to want to know the menu. Most people are going to want to know the location, but, there might be somebody who just wants to know, hey, when did this story all begin and where did Real Deal Tacos get their start? So that person is on a different mission, and so they're scanning for kind of different information, right? So when we know this, right, again, these are content development considerations. When we know that this is what our users are doing, they're not reading all of this stuff, they're scanning it. Okay, we know that. How do we create content to support this behavior that we know that they have? We make stuff concise. That means short, it means brief, it means streamlined and taking all of the fluff out of it. Get to the point. Don't hide all of the information in a bunch of words that don't need to be there. This stuff needs to be scannable. We talked about this in the 10 Commandments lecture. The idea of leveraging headings, subheadings, and bulleted lists to avoid super dense paragraphs of text that we know nobody is going to read in its entirety. You want to make sure that your information is timely and relevant so that your audience has confidence that what they are looking at is valid information. And you want to be as objective as possible in how you present that information to them. So there's this guy, he's a usability expert called Jakob Nielsen. He does a lot of really cool studies. And I kind of geek out on some of his work, but he did a study that said, given the average time that users spend on a web page, they have time to read at most 28% of words on the screen, but 20% is probably more accurate, right? So what that means is that he's done these studies where he tracks people's eyes and attention and the length that they stay on a page, right? And then he does a formula of math that gives him this percentage that says, based on the amount of time that you were looking at this page before you clicked somewhere else, you only had enough time to absorb 20% of the content on the page. That's pretty astounding, right? So when we are, as designers, know this about our audience and the people who are looking at our stuff, what does that tell us? Not everything is going to be noticed, only 20% of it, right? That's right. Make sure that the content is relevant to what the person is searching for, or relevant even to just what's on that page, right? It's the idea that you are taking away the excess, what doesn't need to be there, to help your audience find the stuff that does need to be there, right? So this guy, Jakob Nielsen, did these eye tracking studies and basically followed the eye movements of people looking at websites. And what he consistently found is that people scan websites in a rough F-shaped pattern, right? So most attention is being spent at the top, first two paragraphs, first couple of sentences of those paragraphs, and people are reading from left to right. And so you can see in the top left-hand corner of each of these images, that's where the highest area of concentration of attention is. And then you can see they're reading out a little bit from left to right, left to right. But then what you'll notice is that the heat map indicates that people's eyes get involved in, I call it a vertical plummet, right? It's basically just this scan going down the page because they've read maybe the first couple sentences of the first couple of paragraphs and they haven't found what they're looking for. So their eyes just drop down the page, right? Because they are looking for the thing that they haven't found yet, right? As a designer, thinking about, user behavior, and we know this about our audience of visitors to the site, if we know that people scan pages in an F-shaped pattern, why don't we lay our content out in an F-shaped pattern, right? Because then we are putting the information in the format that we know that they're looking for. And that F-shaped pattern is basically most important information at the top in the first couple of paragraphs. And if you have more information than that, then peppering headings, subheadings, and bulleted lists in there so that our eyes can more quickly float to the very rich, detailed topics or headings or titles or subtitles, so that, like, let's say I am involved in this vertical plummet, right? I'm like looking for something that I haven't found yet on the page, but I see, oh, I've gotten to like a heading, and the heading has a different visual appearance to it. Maybe it's a little bit bigger. Maybe there's more spacing between those elements. Maybe it's a different color. Maybe it's a different font, right? But I'm looking at it and it pops out to me as different from the paragraph text that's below it. And if it's well titled or descriptive, the name of that heading itself lets me know as a user whether or not I want to spend any more time looking at the paragraph of information below it. Does that make sense? So then these headings and subheadings become almost like speed bumps in that vertical plummet, right? I'm scrolling my eyes down the page, but I'm spending a little, microsecond more looking at that heading and subheading and deciding, do I need to read this paragraph? Does it likely contain the information that I'm looking for, right? So these are the considerations with your F-shaped pattern, you guys. Web content is absorbed differently, so it must be developed differently. We talked about only 20% being absorbed, and we talked about it being absorbed or searched in an F-shaped pattern. Again, first two paragraphs should contain the most important information on a page. And using information-rich words in subheadings and bulleted lists is a way to grab user attention while they're in that scanning behavior. Does that make sense? These are simple things, but it's kind of like, aha, okay, this is making sense to me. Now, one of the things that I want to just pause for a second and spend a moment on is that I have given you guys a ton of content in a shared Google folder for a Real Deal Taco website. Your job is to not just copy and paste the content that I've provided in a Word document and slap it onto a web page. That content was developed for a Word doc, not a web page. Care needs to be taken in your curation and placement of that content throughout the site. If you take a look at the about story for Real Deal Tacos, it is page of like deep, dense info. You will have missed the mark if you copy and paste that dense paragraph text from a Word document onto a web page, right? Because people spend more time reading documents than they do web pages. They scan web pages because they're looking for something specific. So what you need to do, how would you do that with a long about story? You have a couple of options. The first one is cut down the text, streamline it. You're going to do a lynda.com tutorial tonight called Writing for the Web, which talks about, a lot of these same considerations, and it's the idea of using language and layout in a way to help facilitate user behavior online, right? The other thing you can do is add pictures. You can add pull quotes. That's one of the things that you highlighted in your proposal, Kayla, is the idea of like taking a quote or two or a tagline and make it visual, like give it kind of a larger visual appearance so that it's not just words, but they're words that have been styled in a way to break up text or to like add some sort of, graphic element on the page, for sure. The other thing to do is to break up that text with headings, subheadings, and bulleted lists. All right. Now, we talk a lot in this class about the web being an interactive medium, right? And that's just the idea that The web is a digital environment that we navigate and are constantly making choices about how to spend our time in that space. And because it's such a choice-driven environment, it's important to note how there are certain opportunities and there are certain challenges with this environment, right? Or this medium. When we talk about medium in general, what does that mean? Middle. But it's also like if you talk about a painter and their medium is oil paints or watercolor points, it's a means of expression, basically. Like we have artists whose medium is clay, an artist whose medium is, like I said, painting or sketching, right? A medium is a form of expression or a way of sharing or communicating an idea or an art form. Now, in this next part of the discussion, I just want to pit a more traditional media, like let's say print, with digital media and the web in general, right? And I want to just highlight the differences between the two so you can start to see how, as a designer, and as a strategist, there are amazing considerations for both environments. Each has opportunities and each has challenges. And the more that you understand about that, the more educated you are in designing anything for either space, right? So again, print versus web, web versus print. Let's talk about a few of these differences. The web is digital, where print is analog. And where we can, I will highlight exceptions to some of these ideas or exceptions to rules. But we're going to just kind of talk about like some general differences between these two mediums of communication and expression. What do you think I mean when I say that the web is digital? Okay, it's all kind of intangible content in the ether, so to speak, right? Okay. And I mean, like that is a good distinction. And with print being analog, what is?
I feel like when you mean digital and analog, or digital is like more picture, like more design based, whereas analog it's more like simple. Yes.
Okay, so print, you know, highlight, but you have picture books, right? Right. So let me kind of tiptoe into this with you. Analog, analog has less utility and it becomes static at a certain point. When I print information in a book, that information can't be changed unless I change the original file or recreate it entirely, right? But digital information and a digital medium is one that can be reused, remixed, repurposed in many different ways without having to recreate or destroy the original version of it, let's say. So think about, let's just say I'm on a web page and I like see a little bit of text I want to copy and paste, and then I right click on an image, and then I screen grab like a portion of a video and I re-put that all together and create an entirely new piece of media, right? It has a usefulness beyond maybe its original intent. Versus print, like let's say that I made a mistake and I misspelled several things in my book, right? I can't just go in and change that in all of the books that are in existence, right? I have to like reprint everything, and now I've basically recreated the original and have like given the older copy no usefulness anymore. I can't reuse that unless I want to reuse it to make paper airplanes or like start fires, right? So there's a different level of manipulation and usefulness, right? Like for instance, let's say that I wrote a blog post and then I was like, oh damn, like I misspelled a few things here. No big deal. I just go edit and I'll update it and repost, right? And so again, the usefulness and the pliability, flexibility of the information. The web is a non-linear experience where print is linear. What do you think that means?
That you can go in different directions with web and you can do different things, whereas print is just writing or drawing, and that's it. Like you can't really do much besides that.
Okay. So, in this sense, web being nonlinear is the idea that when you go to a web page, there's no order that you have to go through to explore that content, right? You don't have to go to the home page and then the services page and then the about page and then finally the contact page, right? There is no A to B, B to C, C to D type of experience. Versus, let's think more about, let's say, a chapter book, right? You pretty much, in order to understand a chapter book, have to go from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 3 in a straight line. But you can jump around anywhere on a website. You can jump to another site if you want. And that kind of leads into this next point in a nice way. The web is user-driven, whereas print is author-driven. Now, I'm going to back up just a moment just to kind of highlight one exception of the linear print, right? If I have an encyclopedia, I don't have to read volumes A through E in order to get to Einstein, to learn about Einstein. I can just jump there, right? So in some cases, or let's say stereo instructions, I don't have to read through the entire packet of information in order to figure out how to update the clock, right? I can just go to the index. So again, there's always going to be exceptions, but we're kind of just talking in generalities here. User-driven means that you choose, you decide. It's up to your prerogative and your choice to go to whatever site you want to go to and look at the pages in whatever order you want to read every word or to read no word at all, right? It's a user-driven experience. Versus print is a more author-driven experience. They have laid that content out in a way that they want you to follow, right? And that in a lot of cases won't make sense unless you do that, right? Web is more active and print is a bit more passive. I don't know about you guys, but I certainly, if I'm on my computer into the night, I just don't get tired because your mind is constantly being stimulated and maybe overstimulated, some might say, because you're having to make choices. You're hearing things, you're seeing things. You are tactile in that you have to touch stuff to click to the next place or type to get where you want to go to. Versus print, like it's more of an immersive experience whereby generally you create space for yourself and time for yourself to really dig into that material. And it's more passive, right? You are taking in the content as the author has laid it out and wants you to go through it versus having to make decisions about what to do next, right? The web is more casual, both in terms of how it's written, the language, and just the approach to the presentation and display of information, right? Casual in that, let's kind of think about kind of the origin of the web and what it's done for the ability to share information across the world, right? Like, so the sum total of human knowledge basically is available to us online. And it has been a great democratizing tool to democratize access to information, right? A poor third world country kid, if he has an internet connection, can reach the world's greatest libraries and can take a course at Stanford through, like free courses online, and so can everybody else. It's democratized access. Because it is democratized access, you need to think about that there are people of varying educational levels and cultures and languages and all of these things accessing the information. So, versus print, we think about back in the day, who had books? Way back in the day when the wealthy, right? Only the wealthy had access to information in books because that was also, you needed money to buy them, but you also needed an education to be able to read them. And only educated people, or only rich people were able to get an education. And because of that, you knew that the people, authors knew, playwrights knew, that the people reading these books were very well educated. And so they use a language that speaks to an educated person. Like they can assume that this person has had this much schooling, and so I can use a vocabulary and a language that's far beyond, what a normal person might, know or how they might speak. Versus, think about the internet and all of this information that's out there for everybody, and how like basically we all have phones in our pockets and can connect to anything online, speaking to a broader audience because more people are accessing your stuff. So if everything was written at a super high vocabulary or very academic writing, a lot of people wouldn't be able to use that information, right? And so the language on the web is more casual. That's something that you'll learn more about in the Writing for the Web activity, that it's at about 5th grade level, reading level is how people write online, right? I think that this was a great point that Leticia made a couple of months ago when she was in the class, and I was saying the web is more casual and print is more formal. And she says, yeah, like think about parties. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, if you get an Evite, you think that that party is like at a certain level of formality, versus if you got a printed invitation in the mail, oh, this party is fancy. And I'm like, you're right. Like that is a great example of how like the web has made things a lot more casual. Like even the languages and the ways that like we speak to one another are more casual online. So I appreciate her for bringing that added perspective into that. I think that the web is the future, obviously. We are just barreling down and just scratching the surface of what this means for all of us and how it's changing all of our lives and how we learn and how we connect with everybody. But I also think print is the future too, because I think that the web is overwhelming. I think that it sometimes is too much for people. It can be addictive and distracting to have like this thing that we plug into like consume so much of us. And I don't know about you guys, you're younger students who have always had this as a part of your educational experience, so you might not feel this way, but I saw you print out some of the pages of the book. Kayla, is that because you don't like reading digital textbooks? Right?
Like to make comparisons, I need to visually see it
Mm-hmm.
to highlight.
Okay.
Because sometimes it's hard for me to.
Exactly, and that's what that was the point that I was hoping that you were going to make here. That something that is an intense focus or something that requires intense focus to study, like people want to be able to do that without distractions, without like a notification flying off the screen, saying that so and so commented on your post or this person liked your Instagram account or whatever the case may be. Because if you're really trying to learn something, you can't have a very distracted attention, right? And the web is just a breeding ground for that. I mean, I can't tell you how many tabs I have open at a time and how many things I'm trying to do that I probably would just be a lot more successful if I did one at a time. But that's what we're working with here. And so I think that they're both the future and that they both have value. You're also seeing kind of a resurgence of what people call the slow movement, right? This idea that we're going to make a slow home cooked meal and share it all, where we're all sitting around the table and nobody has their phones, or people like tangible things like books or invitations or paper crafts or things like that. You're seeing a resurgence of craftsmanship and the return to artisan wares, because people like that thing that they can hold in their hand, not just kind of something that's an intangible digital product, right? So it's interesting to look at the difference. It's interesting. There's opportunities and there's challenges with both, but the more that you understand and can see that, the more you can capitalize on the opportunities and minimize the challenges. All right, so kind of to bring us on home here, you guys this week are developing content for Real Deal Tacos. Now, you're not having to develop it from scratch because I've given you basically everything you need in a folder to create this website. But that being said, like, you cannot take it as it is and just slap it up on the site. You need to develop it, massage it, streamline it, lay it out in such a way that fits, the user needs and supports them in their mission for being on the site. So here's just a few quick summary of tips as you begin this process this week. So we want to embrace this medium, interactive medium, and what we know about it, you guys. Be concise with the content. Please and pretty please, and one more time, do not just copy and paste that entire about story and post it on a web page. More needs to be done with it, right? Provide intuitive navigation systems, right? Intuitive means that it means what you think it means, or you'll find it where you think you're going to find it. If I put all of the menu items under a link called services, it might not be found. But if I put all of the menu items or the food dishes served by Real Deal Tacos under something called a menu, that is a more intuitive choice for the name of that link. Formatting considerations. We talked about the idea of the F-shaped pattern, that's how people online are scanning information on web pages. They are looking for something specific. They will spend more time at the top of the page in the first 2 paragraphs, and then their eyes will just dart down the page. You can help slow them down by putting in headings, subheadings, and bulleted lists that are descriptive of the content that's found immediately below it. You also want to leverage multimedia resources, right? So the web supports just so much rich media, imagery, icons, like textures and layers and colors and audio and video and all of these things. And the more that you can provide in that way for your users, the more dynamic and the more engaging the experience that you will have created. And then last but not least, like I said, the web is the sum total of human knowledge basically to this point in a digital format. You don't have to put every single bit of information about every single thing on your own site. For example, you can basically link to a more credible source for that information. Think about Real Deal Tacos. They really promote organic produce and food, and they can promote that just in terms of the language and the marketing, but they don't need an entire page on their site that's dedicated to talking about the benefits of organic food. They can just say, we are proud to serve organic products, and here's a link to something if you want to learn more about that, and link them to an authority or a more credible source on that. Because let's say you just keep putting in information about, let's say, organic food. You might be throwing up a roadblock or an obstacle stopping your target audience from getting the information they're most likely trying to get when they're at the site. Again, streamlining that, making sure that you are not preventing your users by adding an overwhelming amount of information. Does that make sense? All right, heads up. This is what we're doing this week. At this point, you should have finished your proposal presentations. Like I said, you can assume that your client has picked you to build their new site, right? Tonight and moving forward through the week, you have the Writing for the Web activity. This is where you will watch a short Linda that's got some really amazing ideas in it. It's not too long, and I hope you guys know that you can speed those Lindas up, right? You can make them go 2 times the speed, which takes an hour-long tutorial and turns it into a 30-minute tutorial. That's how I like to watch them. But of course, do what you need to do in order to get the information. But it's going to share some ideas about content development strategies that I want you guys to then turn into a couple of pieces of content for Real Deal Tacos, right? So it's not just watch the Linda, it's not just post the certificate, it's take the knowledge that you've learned and apply it into creating 2 bits of content for Real Deal Tacos, right? Next up is your content management systems activity. This is an analysis where you are comparing different site builders. Wix, Weebly, Squarespace, WordPress, Dreamweaver, Adobe Spark, Adobe Muse, any of those things that you might want to leverage to build your site, I want you to take a look at. I want you to make an informed choice to be able to produce the site that you promised your client, right? So you're going to look at several, and then you are going to start the process. And by start the process, I ask that you put some branding information, identify it as the Real Deal Taco site, and then also a fictitious disclaimer in the footer that basically says, this is a school project. Any similarities between this and a real business are coincidental. And it's just letting people know that if they stumble upon your site at some point, that they're not actually going to be going to look for this food truck at the zoo on Saturday, right? The reason why I have you do this is because it forces you to start this project on Thursday night. Students are always surprised at how long it takes to get up to speed with different content management systems. It is not hard, you guys. It's not hard, but it is time consuming when you don't know what you're doing. I promise you that as you get in there, you will learn tips and tricks to make your work flow faster, but you have to give yourself that time. Now, I alluded to a workshop that Roxanne and I gave in Portfolio right before you got here. And we had 2 hours to basically listen to a podcast and design a graphic design a creation for film or television. And a lot of the students were like, oh, I just don't like what I created and it's not good and I didn't finish it. And I'm like, well, what was your expectation? We only had 2 hours together, right? The point is you need time to do quality work. Do not paint yourself into a corner by not giving yourselves the time that you need to get in there, learn the system, and create something that you can be proud of. That part is within your control, right? This assignment somewhat forces your hand in that, right? You're looking at the content management system that you're going to use to build, and I ask that you pick one, pick a template, and at least put the branding information in the header and in the footer. You provide me a link to that preview, and I know that you are well on your way. One of the things that I find when students start this activity is I go to check their work and check their site and development, and they will have done way more than I asked them to do because it is actually kind of fun. It's building something. You can see this very sort of cool, you can see your strategy and your proposal coming to life in front of you, right? But again, you have to start it in order for that to take place. Last but not least, on Sunday is when your Real Deal Taco site is due, right? That is when I will expect to see the full site, no partial site, no sites under construction, no pages unfinished, the entire thing. Now, trust me, I recognize that for many of you, this might be the first site that you have ever created. What this is an opportunity for me to receive your work and to provide you feedback. And you will be given the opportunity in week 4 to revise that site based upon not only my feedback, but also your growing understanding and ability to apply the concepts and techniques that you are learning in the class, right? Just by continuing with this information, just by continuing to read, by continuing to have these conversations with me in class and to, ask questions and to get answers, you are learning more. Even if you haven't touched that Real Deal site again, when you go to it in week 4, you will have more knowledge, that you will have different eyes that you're looking at it with. You will see something different at that time, and you'll have the opportunity to revise it there. Again, this is a learning process, right? I don't expect you guys to be web designers to the point, like you get 4 short weeks with me. That's it. And actually just 2 weeks on this project, right? What I expect to see is the application of the concepts and techniques that we have talked about in this class, right? If I see any of those 10 commandment things on your site, then you will have missed the mark, right? Because those are the main things that I want you to be applying into your work. So a very good sort of checklist on Sunday night as you are getting ready to submit your project is just to go back and look at that 10 commandment list and say, did I do any of these things? If the answer is no, then like you're sitting pretty, okay? This is basically the sum of week 2. Do you guys, I wanted to show this slide too, which is basically a quick comparison of some website building platforms. WordPress, Blogger, Tumblr, Wix, Weebly, Squarespace, they're all good. They all have their own pros and cons, but that's why you're doing the content management system analysis so that you can make an educated choice about the one that you think is going to work best with your site and with what you promised your client. Not just best with your site, but also with your abilities. People say, oh, like you don't tell me what platform to use. No, because the deliverable here is a website. How you build that website is up to you. I give you guys that choice because some of you might want to get more experience or get more technical with things, and like WordPress would be the way that you would go, right? Some of you want more artistic freedom with what you design. Well, that's definitely Wix, and if that's the kind of muscles that you want to develop or flex with this assignment, I want you to be able to do that. But the end goal for everybody, the end deliverable, is a website. How you get there is entirely up to you and the choices that best suit your own objectives for this activity. Do you guys have any questions about any of that? All right, well, that silence is an indication that my lectures are incredibly clear. So I'm just going to pat myself on the back and, continue at it. Just kidding, you guys. I know that there are always questions that I just basically floodlighted you with a ton of information, and you're probably just like kind of overwhelmed with it all anyway. So as always, please reach out to me with whatever it is that you need and how I can support you through this process this week. Thanks, guys.